A medieval log cabin, built with nothing more than hand-cut wood, clay, and patience, could stay warm through an entire winter. No fiberglass insulation, no plastic vapor barriers, no central heating, no electricity humming behind the walls, just wood and fire and design. Now, pause for a moment and think about your own home. Think about the heating bill, the cold drafts creeping in under doors, the rooms that never quite warm up no matter how high the thermostat climbs. Modern houses are packed with technology, layered with insulation, sealed tight with synthetic materials, yet they still bleed heat every winter. So how is it possible that medieval people, with none of this, lived comfortably through months of freezing temperatures? The easy answer is to say they simply endured the cold, that they suffered more, that they accepted discomfort as part of life. But that answer is wrong. Archaeological evidence, surviving cabins, and historical accounts all point to something far more unsettling. Medieval log cabins weren't just survivable in winter, they were warm, and not by accident. For centuries, we've told ourselves a comforting story about progress, that every generation builds better, smarter, more efficient homes. That old buildings were crude stepping stones toward modern perfection. But winter has a way of exposing lies. Cold doesn't care about good intentions, it only respects physics. And medieval builders understood winter physics in ways we've largely forgotten. They didn't fight the cold by trying to overpower it. They didn't try to trap hot air and seal it inside fragile walls. Instead, they worked with wood as a living material. They designed homes that absorbed heat slowly, held it deep within their structure, and released it back into the space long after the fire had died down. In a medieval cabin, warmth wasn't something you turned on. It was something you built into the house itself. This is where modern thinking goes wrong. Today, we treat wood like a decorative shell, thin panels nailed over insulation, stripped of its natural mass and behavior. Medieval people saw wood differently. To them, a log wasn't just a wall, it was thermal storage. It was a buffer against wind. It was a slow, breathing barrier between human life and a hostile winter landscape. And that difference changes everything. When snow piled high and temperatures stayed below freezing for weeks, medieval cabins didn't lose heat quickly. They lost it slowly, painfully slowly. The kind of slow that lets a single fire warm a space for hours. The kind of slow that means waking up to a room that's still livable, not frozen solid. This wasn't luck, it wasn't nostalgia, and it definitely wasn't primitive ignorance stumbling into success. It was the result of centuries of trial, failure, and quiet observation, passed down not through textbooks, but through survival itself. Once you understand how these cabins worked, it becomes impossible to ignore a troubling question. If people hundreds of years ago could build wooden homes that stayed warm all winter, why do so many modern wooden houses still struggle to do the same? And more importantly, what did they know about wood, heat, and winter that we chose to forget? Modern homes are supposed to be better. That's the assumption we rarely question. Better materials, better science, better technology. And yet, the moment winter arrives, that confidence starts to crack. You feel it the first time cold air slides across the floor. You notice it when one room stays warm while another never does. You hear it in the furnace cycling on and off, working harder every year just to maintain the same level of comfort. What's strange is not that homes lose heat. What's strange is how quickly they lose it. Modern houses are designed around a single idea: trap warm air. Insulation, vapor barriers, sealed walls, tight windows. All of it is meant to hold heated air inside as long as possible. On paper, this sounds efficient. In reality, it creates a fragile system that fails the moment conditions are perfect. tiny draft, a cold floor, a thermal bridge hidden behind drywall. Heat escapes, and the entire system starts chasing itself. The heater turns on. The air warms briefly. The heat rises, pools near the ceiling, and slips out through the weakest points. Then the cycle repeats. More fuel, more electricity, more cost. Medieval builders didn't think this way because they couldn't afford to. Firewood wasn't cheap labor. Cutting, hauling, and drying wood took enormous effort. Wasting heat wasn't an inconvenience, it was a threat. So instead of focusing on air, they focused on structure. This is where modern design quietly betrays us. Today, walls are thin, floors are hollow,
dead.
Wood is sliced into narrow boards and stripped of mass. Even in
Where
wooden
is
homes,
the
the wood
warmth
itself
in
does
this
almost
place?
nothing thermally. It's decoration. The real work is outsourced to insulation hidden behind it. Remove that insulation and the house collapses thermally almost instantly. Medieval cabins were the opposite. Their walls were not shells, they were bodies. Thick, solid, heavy bodies made of full logs, not panels. These walls didn't just separate inside from outside, they slowed the movement of heat itself. When a fire burned inside a medieval cabin, the warmth didn't vanish into the air and escape upward. It sank into the logs, it soaked in, and once stored, it stayed there. This is the concept modern homes almost completely ignore: thermal mass. Air heats quickly, but it cools just as fast. Wood, especially in large volumes, heats slowly and cools slowly. That difference is everything in winter. A medieval cabin wasn't warm because the air was hot. It was warm because the building itself became warm. The walls, the floor, even the furniture absorbed heat over hours and quietly released it back into the space long after the fire faded. In modern homes, when the heat turns off, comfort collapses within minutes. In a medieval cabin, warmth lingered. Not because it was sealed airtight, but because it was heavy. There's another problem with modern houses that rarely gets discussed: wind. We think insulation stops cold, but insulation does very little once moving air gets involved. Wind strips heat mercilessly. It sneaks through cracks, pushes cold air into cavities, and carries warmth away no matter how well insulated a wall claims to be. Medieval builders didn't try to defeat wind with layers of synthetic material. They defeated it with mass and geometry. Thick log walls broke airflow. Low profiles reduced exposure. Simple shapes minimized pressure points. Instead of relying on perfect seals, which inevitably fail, they designed buildings that remained forgiving even when gaps appeared. Modern homes are not forgiving. They depend on precision, and precision degrades. Materials age, houses settle, seals dry out, and each small failure compounds until the heating system becomes a permanent emergency response. Perhaps the most ironic mistake modern design makes is treating breathability as a flaw. We are taught that a house should never breathe, that any air movement through walls is a defect. Medieval cabins disagreed. They allowed slow, controlled exchange. Moisture escaped instead of condensing inside walls. Wood adjusted naturally to temperature changes instead of cracking under rigid constraints. As a result, medieval homes didn't just stay warmer, they stayed healthier. Dry walls insulate better than damp ones. Stable temperatures prevent rot, and structures that move with the seasons last longer than those that fight them. None of this was accidental. Medieval builders learned these lessons the hard way, through winters that punished bad decisions, through failures that froze families and burned excess firewood. Over generations, only the designs that worked survived. Modern homes, by contrast, are often insulated against experience itself. Designed in offices, optimized for codes, not winters, built quickly, not patiently. So when we ask why medieval log cabins stayed warm all winter, the answer isn't mystery or magic. It's that they were designed for winter first, and everything else second. To understand why medieval log cabins stayed warm, you have to forget almost everything modern housing teaches you about heat. Because medieval builders were not trying to keep hot air inside a box. They were trying to slow time itself, specifically the time it took for heat to leave the building. And the secret to doing that wasn't insulation, it was mass. A medieval log cabin was built from whole trees, not processed boards. Each log was thick, dense, and heavy. When stacked together, those logs formed walls that behaved less like barriers and more like batteries. When a fire burned inside the cabin, the heat didn't just warm the air for a moment before escaping upward. It moved slowly into the wood itself. Inch by inch, hour by hour, the logs absorbed warmth deep into their core. This is something modern homes almost never do. Thin walls heat quickly, but they also cool quickly. Medieval walls heated slowly, and that slowness was the advantage. Once the logs were warm, they stayed warm long after the fire died down. The cabin didn't experience sharp temperature swings. It resisted them. Imagine lighting a fire in the evening. As the flames crackled, the air warmed first, but that warmth didn't rush out. It pressed gently into the logs surrounding the space. By nightfall, the walls themselves became warm to the touch. By morning, even with embers fading, the cabin was still holding on to yesterday's heat. Not hot, but livable, comfortable, survivable. Medieval builders understood something modern design ignores. Comfort isn't about peak temperature, it's about stability. A room that slowly cools feels warmer than one that constantly reheats and collapses. The human body notices change more than numbers. Medieval cabins reduced change. This worked because wood, in large volumes, behaves very differently from air. Air is impatient. It heats instantly and escapes just as fast. Wood is stubborn. It resists change. Thick logs delay heat loss by sheer inertia. Cold has to work harder to penetrate them, and when it finally does, it arrives late, long after the occupants have already stored enough warmth to last through the night. Even the way logs were fitted mattered. Medieval cabins didn't rely on perfect seals. Instead, logs were shaped to sit tightly under their own weight. Gravity did most of the work. As wood swelled slightly with warmth and moisture, gaps closed instead of opening. The structure became tighter in winter, not looser. And because the walls were solid wood from inside to outside, there were no hidden cavities where cold air could race through unseen. Modern walls are full of hollow spaces. Medieval walls were not. What you touched inside was the same material facing the storm outside. That continuity slowed heat loss in a way layered systems struggled to replicate. Floors played a role too. Medieval cabins often sat close to the ground or directly on stone foundations. At first glance, this seems like a flaw, but once warmed, the floor became another thermal reservoir. Cold air sinks. Warmth stored low in the structure countered that effect. Instead of freezing feet, people experienced a gentle, even temperature from floor to ceiling. This is why medieval cabins didn't need constant fires. They needed rhythm. Fire was used to charge the building with heat, not to chase escaping warmth all day. Once the structure was warm, it did most of the work itself. Modern homes reversed this logic. You heat the air and expect it to behave, but air doesn't behave. It rises, escapes, and demands more energy. Medieval cabins bypassed that problem by focusing on what doesn't move easily. There's also a psychological element we often overlook. In a medieval cabin, warmth felt different. You weren't surrounded by cold surfaces radiating chill back at you. The walls themselves were neutral or warm. That reduces the body's sense of heat loss. You feel comfortable at lower air temperatures when surfaces around you aren't stealing warmth from your skin. This wasn't luxury, it was efficiency, born from necessity. Firewood had to last. Winters were long. Mistakes were unforgiving. The cabin had to work even when the fire went out. And it did. Not because medieval people were tougher, but because their homes were smarter in the ways that mattered most. By the time winter arrived, a medieval cabin was no longer just a shelter. It became a system. Every decision made long before the first snowfall, where the cabin stood, how it faced the wind, how high the walls rose, where openings were allowed, suddenly revealed its purpose. Medieval builders did not design for beauty or convenience first. They designed for the season that could kill them. Orientation mattered more than decoration. Cabins were rarely placed randomly. Builders watched prevailing winds the way sailors read currents. The broadest, strongest walls faced into the cold wind, presenting thick timber instead of openings. The warmer, calmer side faced sunlight, even weak winter sun, allowing precious warmth to enter naturally during the day. This wasn't passive solar theory. It was lived experience passed down through generations who noticed which homes stayed warm and which ones emptied villages in winter. Height was another deliberate choice. Medieval cabins kept ceilings low, not cramped, but contained. Warm air rises, and every extra foot of height was wasted heat drifting out of reach. Modern homes celebrate high ceilings as luxury. Medieval builders saw them as fuel leaks. A lower ceiling meant the same fire warmed the space faster and more evenly. Heat stayed where people lived, slept, and worked, not floating uselessly overhead. Openings were treated with suspicion. Every door or window was a negotiation with winter, and winter always demanded payment. This is why medieval cabins had so few of them. Windows were small, deeply set into thick walls, not to keep people in the dark, but to slow the movement of cold. The depth of the wall mattered. Cold air entering a thick log opening lost energy before it ever reached the interior space. By the time it arrived, it was already weakened. Doors were even more critical. A poorly designed door could undo everything else. Medieval doors were heavy, thick, and tight-fitting, often reinforced with additional layers of wood or animal hide. They weren't meant to swing easily. They were meant to seal. Opening a door in winter was a serious act, done quickly, because everyone understood how much warmth could escape in seconds. The layout inside the cabin followed the same logic. The hearth was not placed randomly. It sat where heat could radiate into the greatest mass of wood. Fire wasn't just for cooking or light. It was the engine charging the entire structure with warmth. Benches, beds, and workspaces were arranged to benefit from residual heat stored in walls and floors, not just from direct flames. Even storage played a role. Firewood stacked inside the cabin didn't just stay dry. It warmed slowly, reducing the shock of cold fuel entering the fire. This made burning more efficient and reduced temperature swings. Tools, furniture, and everyday objects absorbed heat during the day and quietly released it at night. Nothing was wasted. Perhaps the most misunderstood feature of medieval cabins is how little they tried to be airtight. Modern thinking says airtight equals efficient. Medieval thinking said controlled leakage equals survival. Cabins allowed slow, gentle air exchange through wood itself and carefully chosen gaps. This prevented moisture from building up inside walls. Dry wood insulates better than damp wood. Walls that stayed dry stayed warm. Rigid, modern homes trap moisture and then fight the consequences with ventilation systems and dehumidifiers. Medieval cabins avoided the problem by never creating it in the first place. The structure adapted with the seasons. Wood expanded and contracted. Gaps opened and closed naturally. Instead of cracking, the cabin flexed. What emerges from all this is a design philosophy that feels almost alien today. Medieval cabins weren't optimized for comfort at a single moment. They were optimized for endurance. They assumed the fire would die down. They assumed storms would last. They assumed fuel would be limited. And they were built to keep working anyway. Winter didn't defeat these homes because winter had already been invited into the design process. Every beam, every joint, every opening acknowledged its presence. Modern houses often pretend winter is a temporary inconvenience. Medieval cabins treated it as a permanent reality. And that difference explains why, when the fire faded and the night stretched long and silent, medieval families didn't freeze. Their homes were already doing the work for them. By this point, the uncomfortable truth starts to surface. Medieval log cabins didn't stay warm because people worked harder or tolerated misery better. They stayed warm because the buildings themselves carried the burden. And that's exactly what modern homes no longer do. Somewhere along the way, we changed our priorities. We began designing houses for speed, cost, and standardization instead of seasons. Walls became thinner. Materials became lighter. Structures stopped storing heat and started depending on machines to replace it. Comfort shifted from something built into the house to something rented by the hour through fuel and electricity. Modern homes are incredibly precise, but that precision is also their weakness. They rely on perfect seals, perfect insulation layers, perfect installation. The problem is that perfection doesn't survive time. Buildings settle, materials shrink, small gaps form, and once those gaps appear, heat escapes faster than any heater can compensate. Medieval cabins didn't depend on perfection. They depended on tolerance. Even when gaps formed, even when logs shifted, the sheer mass of the structure kept working. We also stopped building for fuel scarcity. Medieval families assumed firewood would always be limited. Every spark mattered. So cabins were designed to stretch heat as far as possible. Modern homes assume unlimited energy. Turn the thermostat higher. Let the furnace cycle again. The building itself doesn't need to be efficient if the system can brute force comfort. Until fuel prices rise, until power fails, until winter reminds us how fragile that assumption is. Another thing we lost is patience. Medieval cabins were built slowly. Logs were selected carefully, often cut and seasoned with specific seasons in mind. Builders understood how wood behaved after years, not weeks. Modern construction doesn't wait for wood to stabilize. It dries it aggressively, processes it quickly, and installs it before it has time to adapt. The result is material that looks clean but behaves poorly under long-term thermal stress. There's also a deeper philosophical shift. Medieval builders designed homes as shelters against nature, not sealed bubbles separated from it. Cold, wind, and moisture were acknowledged forces, not enemies to be erased. The cabin moderated these forces instead of pretending they didn't exist. Modern homes try to exclude nature entirely, and then struggle endlessly when nature finds a way back in. Perhaps the biggest thing we lost is respect for thermal mass. In chasing lightweight efficiency, we forgot that weight can be an ally. Thick wood slows heat loss. Heavy floors stabilize temperature. Solid walls reduce drafts simply by existing. Medieval cabins understood this intuitively. Modern homes often fight physics with layers instead of working with it. What's striking is that none of this knowledge disappeared because it stopped working. It disappeared because it didn't fit industrial systems. Thick logs don't move easily. Slow construction doesn't scale well. Buildings designed for endurance don't maximize short-term profit. So the old methods were quietly abandoned, not disproven. When we look at medieval cabins today, we tend to see nostalgia or romantic simplicity. But winter doesn't care about aesthetics. It cares about performance. And judged by winter standards, many medieval homes outperform buildings that cost hundreds of times more to construct. This isn't a call to abandon modern living. It's a reminder that progress sometimes forgets what matters most. Medieval cabins weren't warm because they were old. They were warm because they were honest. Honest about cold, about limits, and about what a home is actually supposed to do when everything else fails. When you strip away the romance, the mythology, and the false idea that medieval life was simply harsher, what remains is a quiet, unsettling realization. Medieval log cabins stayed warm, not because people accepted suffering, but because their homes were designed to keep working when comfort systems failed. They assumed the fire would burn low. They assumed fuel would run out. They assumed winter would not negotiate. And they built accordingly. A medieval cabin was never meant to feel perfect at any one moment. It was meant to remain livable across long nights, frozen mornings, and weeks of unbroken cold. Warmth was something accumulated slowly, protected carefully, and spent wisely. The house itself became a partner in survival, not a passive shell waiting for a machine to rescue it. That mindset has almost completely disappeared. Today, we build houses that feel comfortable only as long as energy flows freely. When the power goes out, comfort collapses. When fuel becomes expensive, warmth becomes fragile. Medieval homes were never fragile in that way. They were resilient because they assumed scarcity, not abundance. And that's the real lesson hiding inside these old log walls. Medieval builders didn't misunderstand heat. They understood failure. They knew fires go out. Winds change. Winters linger longer than expected. So they designed homes that forgave mistakes and absorbed hardship quietly, without demanding constant intervention. Once you see that, it becomes hard to ignore how much modern housing depends on denial. Denial that energy is limited. Denial that materials age. Denial that winter is more than a temporary inconvenience. Medieval cabins didn't deny winter. They respected it. And in return, winter spared the people inside. We don't need to return to medieval life to learn from this. But we do need to ask why so much of this knowledge was discarded. Not because it failed, but because it didn't fit an industrial world built on speed, profit, and short-term comfort. And this opens a much bigger question. If medieval builders understood how to make wood, fire, and structure work together to survive months of cold, what else did they understand about winter that we no longer design for? Because the log cabin wasn't the only answer. It was just the beginning.